Hey everyone, welcome to the Craft Beer Professionals 2025 Spring Virtual Conference. Small Batch Standard is pumped to be the day one sponsor, and we're even more excited to help you generate more profit. Right now, today, it has never been harder to generate profit in the craft brewing industry. And here's why. If these two graphs don't paint a clear picture of what's happening in craft today, I don't know what will. In order to help you navigate this, we have put something together just for you. We call it the Small Batch Standard Profit Plays. These are excerpts from our profit playbook and include our top strategies for boosting profit at your brewery. And because you're here today, you get those plays for free. So head over to sbstandard.com/CBP to claim your copy. Thanks for being here and enjoy the talk.
Hi everybody, my name is John Szymankiewicz. I'm with Beer Law Center. Hope you'll enjoy this little talk today, but first of all, let me say thanks to Chris and Small Batch Standard for one, sponsoring this, and two, for that those playbooks that you can download now. I'm sure if you didn't get it already, scan that QR code later and get that. It is going to be it's going to be the focus of everything we do for years to come now is focusing on profitability rather than just making good beer. It's got to be a change in the way we run as an industry. But that's my soapbox. I'll get off of that for the rest of this talk because I want to talk today about THC beverages. Oh my gosh, it is growing so fast. There's just so much to talk about and so little guidance that we need to be having some pretty open communication about what to do out there, what works, what doesn't work, and what things you need to be concerned about. Now, I will tell you the way this is being presented, I can't actually see the chat. So I'm not going to be able to answer questions live as we go. But if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll address all of those. We're trying to address all of those at the end of the presentation. Who knows, maybe I'll even hit it along the way. But please don't want to detract from your ability to interact. I will get to those, I promise. Anyway, so I've been getting a lot of calls and a lot of questions about THC beverages. Especially if you talk to some of the THC extract providers, they're like, hey, if you've got a stainless steel tank and a pump, you can make a THC beverage. Yes, that's true, but also somewhat misleading. So it really appeals to those who have a brewery, a winery, or a distillery. Hey, I've already got the equipment. I'm already dealing with beverages. How do I do this? And in fact, if you've got a tap room, right, then you are probably already selling a THC beverage in your tasting room or tap room because they're being asked for. There's a demand for them. So if you can produce it and recapture some of that margin, that's the way to go. So what I want to talk about today are what I think about, what keeps me awake at night, thinking about THC beverages, and in particular, how it applies to breweries, wineries, and distilleries, right? Those highly regulated, federally and state licensed facilities. I'll also go through some of the questions I've gotten, some of the issues I've seen, and some best practices. Along those lines, here's what to expect from the talk today. You gotta hear a little bit about me. We're gonna talk about THC in general, right? The difference between cannabis and hemp, and Delta 9, and all these other sort of variations. We're going to talk about why THC beverages and why it makes sense for potentially brewers to make those. What have you got to do to make those in your facility? Some best practices, and I'll share some horror stories or bad ideas with you as well. All right, so stick with me. First, let me tell you a little bit about us. Again, we're Beer Law Center. I've got some of my new trade show swag right behind me here, so I thought I'd use today's to advertise some of that. By the way, if you're going to the Craft Brewers Conference in Indianapolis, come by and see me, booth 1125, but I digress. But Beer Law Center, we're a small firm. We work exclusively with breweries, wineries, distilleries, and alcohol retailers. We generally do not represent distributors. And the issue we found out there is very quickly, we had when I tried to represent a few distributors, very quickly I had clients that were suppliers who signed up with a distributor that I was representing, and now I can't represent either of them because if there's a dispute that comes up. So we just made the strategic decision, no distributors. So we are based in Raleigh, North Carolina. We practice in Virginia, West Virginia, and DC, as well as North Carolina. And we tend to focus on all the legal issues you have for running an alcohol business. We are not litigators. You get sued or want to sue somebody, that's cool. I'll help you find somebody who can do that or can help you with that. But I'm one of those attorneys, I don't like to go to court. I move paper around. That's how I work, and hopefully keep you out of the courtroom. Because again, if I go to the court, something bad has happened. So myself, I have been a full-time alcohol attorney for almost 15 years now. I talk on this subject regularly. I was a home brewer. I am a home brewer, have been for about 25 years. In fact, I've got here at the office, 1 beer and 1 mead on tap. At home, I've got 3 beers on tap and 2 in the fermenter. So it's still a good hobby for me. That's what I do in my free time. Mostly lagers, if you're interested, German lagers, but an IPA here and there as well. Also, as far as I know, and I've done a little bit of digging, I am the only certified Cicerone alcohol attorney in the United States. Also a BJCP Judge and Level II WSET in both wines and beer, and one of the very few designated educators for WSET's beer curriculum in the US. So that's a little bit about me. I try and push all this stuff out and tell you all this stuff because I work with a lot of attorneys, I work with a lot of businesses, obviously, and a lot of folks have alcohol as a part of their practice. Right, I'm a litigator and I do some alcohol law. I'm a transactional corporate attorney, but I do some alcohol law. All I do is alcohol. All of my clients are touching the alcohol business in one way or another. So this is sort of my bread and butter and what I do day in and day out. And now getting more and more into THC and cannabis. So with that as a segue, let's talk about what it is actually that we're dealing with here. So you'll hear the term hemp, and you'll hear the term cannabis. The term marijuana is fading quickly from the preferred nomenclature. Marijuana, one, carries a lot of baggage with it and is typically used to refer to the illegal drug, right? Cannabis is the plant, right? And hemp, that's the same plant. They are not two different plants. They are not two different species or anything like that. The difference between hemp, and we're going to talk a lot about hemp here, not cannabis, was spelled out in the 2018 Farm Bill. And essentially it says, hey, we're going to take this cannabis plant, and if it's below 0.38% THC by dry weight, it's not cannabis anymore, it's hemp. And there was a lot of discussion and details in that going to the extent that, okay, if it's below 0.3%, well, then its major commercial use is as a fiber, right? If we go back to the tall ships era, most of the rope was hemp. So it was primarily used as a fiber. Then after these sort of, I won't say floodgates opened, but after this became a thing, right, hemp, now we figured out all kinds of ways to use other chemicals, use other extracts of the hemp plant while still being below that 0.3% THC by dry weight. And here, when we talk about THC, we're talking about Delta 9 THC. That'll come up again here in a little bit later. Again, going back to that Farm Bill, it made hemp and hemp derivatives like CBD. Remember, CBD exploded back about 7 or 8 years ago. Those are all federally legal, right? As long as it's below 0.3% THC by dry weight, and you'll hear me keep saying that term, it's important. As long as it's below 0.3% THC by dry weight, it's legal across the country. California has legalized cannabis, other states have as well, Colorado, and they've each got their own ways of regulating and allowing the sales of cannabis. And cannabis, by definition, is over 0.3% THC. And that's the stuff that you go, oh, I like this strain for this particular issue. I like that strain because it helps me get to sleep. This one's really good for, say, PTSD or some of these other potential uses of cannabis. The other interesting thing that the Farm Bill did was it essentially prevents states from banning hemp and hemp derivatives completely. It allows the states to regulate them, but they can't just say no hemp. We can't have hemp in any form in the state. So that really kind of opened a new market where even if the state has not legalized cannabis, well, but I can take a hemp derivative into that state. I can sell a hemp derivative, and that 0.3% THC by dry weight, well, depending on the product I'm making, I can still make a fairly substantial dosage of something that gives me that buzz or that experience like THC or like Delta 9 THC, and still be below that dry weight threshold. Great example are the gummies, right? There are gummies and edibles all over the place. And that THC by dry weight is, okay, how much THC is in that, 1,000 gram or 500 gram edible, right? Well, gosh, if you've got 1,000 grams of something, well, I can get 3 grams of THC and be below that 0.3% THC. That's not 3 milligrams, that's 3 grams, right? And most of the dosage we see in the market is between 3 and 15 milligrams on a per serving basis. So, even on a fairly small gummy, you can get a fairly significant milligram dose while being under that 0.3% THC by dry weight. So that's going to come back a few times as we talk about this by dry weight, and that's the magic number we need to remember. That and Delta 9 THC. Delta 9 THC is the federally regulated Schedule I drug that, hey, that's not what you can do, right? That's the substance, basically THC is shorthand for Delta 9 THC, as the principal psychoactive ingredient in what was seen as marijuana, right? But it's not the only one. There are other hemp derivatives or cannabis derivatives that act not dissimilarly, but are different chemicals, Delta 8, Delta 10, Delta X. These are either isomers or chiral partners or slight variations on the Delta 9 THC molecule that still have a psychoactive effect, although one, they aren't near as well studied as Delta 9 THC, and two, they are almost completely unregulated, right? The Delta 8s, Delta 10s, Delta X, all of these things there are very few regulations, if any, out there. But here are some interesting pieces about that. The DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, has said that only naturally derived THC is hemp. So synthetic Delta products are illegal regardless of their percent. So, for example, if I have a hemp plant and extract the Delta 9 THC, I have a tincture or a bottle of basically oil, right? The Delta 9 THC carrier, that's fine. But if I go to a lab and create Delta 9 THC, which the science has evolved to, we can do this and we can change isomers and chirality of the organic molecules to create these different things. If I create it from scratch, if I create it synthetically, then it's not legal either way, whether it's below 0.3% or above 0.3%, it's just illegal. Their DEA has said the Farm Bill only relates to the stuff that has been derived from the plant. Okay, so I want you to, as we go forward, be thinking about, we're talking principally in this about Delta 9 THC, but there are other THC derivatives and THC analogs, Delta 9 analogs, that can be used or maybe should or shouldn't be used. That's a good open question, but there's other stuff on the market. For the THC beverages, we're talking principally about Delta 9 THC in adult consumption beverages. So, important takeaways from that last few slides. One, and keep hammering this, less than 0.3% Delta 9 THC by dry weight. Cannabis still illegal in the federal at the federal level. I don't care what it is in your state. It's still illegal at the federal level. And that's going to be something I'm going to highlight again later, also in terms of what you need to do as a brewer if you're going to make this stuff. The extract must be less than 0.3% delta 9 THC by dry weight. Okay, that's important, right? Because that is the point which it's hemp. If it's above 0.3% delta 9 THC, it is cannabis, right? And only licensed suppliers, licensed hemp processors can have hemp in higher quantities or higher concentrations than 0.3% delta 9 THC. You as a non-licensed hemp processor, or excuse me, that's not the right way to put that. You as not a licensed hemp processor, unless it's 0.3% or below, it's illegal for you to possess it, okay? And it cannot be mixed with alcohol. It's illegal federally and in many or most states. And people say, well, wait a minute, we've had hemp beers for a while. That's true. And those beers have to be less than 0.3% delta 9 THC by dry weight, but the way you add it is only in a very few options. Specifically, hemp or cannabis is not a traditionally recognized brewing ingredient as far as the federal government is concerned. And so if you are creating a product that uses non-traditional ingredients or non-traditional methods, then you need to get a formula approval for that product. That's why all seltzers require federal formula approval, because they're not a traditional beer. They don't have, it's a malt substitute, but it doesn't have the characteristics normally attributed to a beer. Right? This has something else. So seltzers had to have a formula approval. If you're going to add hemp to a beer, you have to have formula approval. And as a tincture, as a liquid, that's not an available means to add hemp to a beer. I think you can't add flour, but you can add seeds. You can add I think you can add stems of the plant, but it's basically only these are the 2 or 3 ways you can add hemp to beer and still be in federal compliance. If you're adding something other than those ways, you're out of federal compliance. Potentially, and not potentially, that's a bad thing, right? In those states where cannabis is legal, the federal government has largely said, okay, we will leave that to the state, right? We'll leave the state to sort out what that's going to look like, and probably not enforce our formula issues quite so much there, because it's legal locally but not federally. On the other hand, there was a case, this is probably 9 years ago, there was a brewery in Florida that had made a hemp beer, and the TTB came after them, not because hemp wasn't allowed in the beer, but because they didn't get formula approval to do it. So they had the beer advertised as hemp. They said contains hemp at less than 0.3% THC, but they didn't get approval for that. So that's those are the folks that they are potentially going after in the states where it's not legal, or where it's marginally, or the legality is in flux. Okay. So why THC beverages? And I think most folks know this. If you're already tuning in, you've already seen this. The demand is skyrocketing. Every tap room, tasting room I know is selling at least one THC alternative. Several have their own coolers of both an NA alternative and a THC alternative. And then my local large adult beverage store, here it's Total Wine, but like Bevmo if you're out on the West Coast. In the last, I want to say 3 or 4 months, they've come in and ripped out like an entire aisle or half aisle of what was craft beer and regional wines or something. They've stripped that out, and now half of that aisle is THC and the other half is non-alcoholic beer or not NA alternatives. And we've just seen an explosion in the offerings out there. One reason, of course, is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, if it's not mixed with alcohol, if it's not a beer, beer franchise laws don't apply. So now anybody that's a distributor of anything can potentially distribute this product far and wide, right, without having to be a licensed alcohol distributor. All right, so the production, here's another reason you want to capture those margins. The production is simple. If you can mix flavor, sweetener, and extract with water and carbonate it, congratulations, you can make a THC beverage. Now, can you make a good THC beverage? Well, we'll see about that. We'll see about that. And for a lot of us in the industry, post-COVID, we learned we had to have some product in distribution to guard against, issues when you're completely dependent on your tap room or tasting room. But we all still know that the over the bar top is the highest margins. Well, this is true for THC as well, or THC beverages as well. If you are buying them for your tasting room at wholesale and selling them to somebody, well, great, you're missing some margin that if you could have produced it on your own, you could have recaptured that difference when you're selling to consumers. Either way, you want to give customers a option to keep their butts in seats to stay longer. So it's okay, I'm going to have one IPA and then I'm going to switch to my THC stuff because it's lower in calories. I feel like it's a healthier alternative, or I'm sober curious, or the folks that come in with your regulars. There's, I'm not really interested in a seltzer. I want something lower in calories. Oh, I'll do a THC. I'm trying to stay off alcohol right now. Just had dry January, for instance. And I think that was a huge boon to the THC folks because that's dry. Anyway, so I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir on this stuff about why you might be interested in THC beverages. But now what? Great, that all makes sense, John. What do I have to do? What's the process? So we're going to talk about what we see as differences if we're looking at THC beverages through the lens of I'm a brewery or I'm an alcohol producer. What's that like? For what do I have to think about differently? What do I have to do differently from what I normally make to make the THC beverage? Let's start with labeling. The only reason that our labels are as minimal as they are is because alcohol products are covered by the TTB from a labeling perspective. If it's not alcohol, and again, at the federal level, that's below 0.5% ABV, alcohol by volume. If it's less than that, it's not an alcohol product. So it's not regulated by TTB, or in many states, the ABC either. Some states reach into that category. Check with your local regulations on that. But in general, it's going to be outside the ABC's purview. But if it's not an alcohol product, by default, that means it's a food product. That means you have to follow the FDA requirements, including nutritional information. Before I jump down to that other one, keep in mind that, again, if it's a food product, you also have to be registered with the FDA as a food production facility, which you all should be, because that's a requirement for being a brewery as well, going back to the Homeland Security Act of 2002, I think, something like that. You have to register as an FDA facility just so they can keep track of, who's in the food chain between cattle farms, wheat farms, barley farms, and the end consumers. But you'd register with the FDA. You then have to follow the FDA labeling requirements, including the nutritional information. I wouldn't worry too much about that because there are folks out there, there are labs out there. No big deal. You send them a sample, they send it back to you. Okay, here's the calories, here's the grams of protein, grams of all your nutritional breakdown. So it's just an additional test you have to have, but that also means you have to do it for at least every product, right? Because if you have a mango THC beverage, it probably has a different caloric or flavor profile or recipe than, say, I don't know why you would do this, a spearmint THC beverage, right? So you will have to do it at least for each product. because you are a food production facility, you also want to check with your local authorities for other production requirements. For example, here in North Carolina, if I'm making brownies or cakes or something like that for resale or to be distributed at a wholesale level, I also have to comply with our Department of Agriculture. They regulate that part of the industry. So be sure and check on that if you have any special things locally you need to do things differently. For example, I have not verified this, but I was told that California, they just put in a ban on THC beverages, I believe. But when they were allowing it, because again, cannabis is legal in California, the government said, the state of California said, well, THC beverages contain THC. We should be selling the THC beverages through the dispensary system. So the theory was you could not go to your local brewery tap room or your local watering hole, bottle shop, etc., and get a THC beverage. You could only get it through the dispensary. That kind of made things a pain and certainly reduces the attractiveness of producing a THC beverage if you can't sell it yourself. So there are going to be potential local regulations, requirements, or limitations that you want to look at, even where cannabis is legal. All right, issue number 2, alcohol. To avoid TTB, where you cannot add extract, the product has to be below 0.5% alcohol by volume. If you're making a pure carbonated beverage, that's fine. But what if you're using a dealcoholized beer or an arrested fermentation? That will have some alcohol in it. So, and again, some, as long as it's below 0.5, we're fine with that. But some of that is highly dependent on how you run the equipment. For example, the dealcoholized product, right? You're going to do a reverse osmosis process to remove the alcohol from the beer, and you're going to end up with, a higher ABV. Not a higher. You're going to end up with an alcohol product that's typically shifted into a seltzer because it's basically odorless, flavorless, but it has alcohol. Great, you can make a seltzer out of that, and then you end up with a non-alcohol beer of less than 0.5% alcohol by volume. But if you're not running that equipment right, what happens if it's 0.6%? What happens if it's 0.7%? I don't care if it's down to 0.2 or 0.3, but it's got to be below 0.5. And you really need to worry about, okay, what are the tolerances on that system, right? So, great, this is 0.5%. Well, wait a minute, it came out at 0.5%. Does that mean it's somewhere between 0.3 and 0.7? Is it a 0.2% variance? And if so, what happens if you retest that and it's 0.6, right? So you have to think about, what are you doing with this? How is it potentially going to be processed? What might you have to do different with it? If you test it and it's 0.6, you need to be prepared to dilute that product, right? So it's below the 0.5%. You can do that because, again, if you're a licensed brewery, you can have a beer, right? You can make a beer, you can drop the alcohol, you can dilute it down. That's not a problem. It's going to be harder with THC, but you've got to be below that 0.5% to avoid the TTB interference on formula and THC compliance issues. Okay. Issue 3, formulation. Here's where that dry weight stuff comes back around. The product must be less than 0.3% delta 9 THC by dry weight. And I've had this question, how do you do dry weight for a liquid beverage? Well, dry weight is after all the moisture has been removed. So the way to think about that is, if you have a beer, right? We all know that say 7% IPA, 93% of that is water, or largely 93% of that is water. 7% of that is your ethanol. And then there's all the other stuff that makes it taste like an IPA, right? So if you leave your glass out and let the water and the ethanol evaporate, whatever's left, whatever sticks to the side of the glass or in the bottom of the glass, whatever's left is that dry weight basis, right? So if you are creating a THC beverage with, let's say, no alcohol in it, for example, you're going to have water, right? And CO2, because you're going to carbonate this thing. There is a little bit of calcium oxide or calcium carbonate that comes along with the CO2 and carbonic and carboxylic acid, with the chemistry and so forth, but it's pretty minimal. Most of the time, your dry weight basis is going to be made up of the THC that you're adding, sugars or sweeteners, emulsifiers to keep things in suspension, and your flavoring. Well, again, if you can put 1,000 grams into 1,000 grams of stuff, right? Whether it's sugar, emulsifiers, flavorings, you can put 1,000 grams of stuff into this pint, let's say serving size, right? Then I can get up to 3 grams, which again is a tremendous amount of THC. I can get up to 3 grams of Delta-9 THC and still be under that 0.3% Delta-9 THC by dry weight. So you want to look at, okay, how much stuff, how much dry ingredients, how much non-water, non-alcohol am I adding to this, and figure out what that's going to look like, right? So let's say you're aiming for a 3 milligram dose on a serving size, whether that's 12 ounces or a pint or whatever. That means you need to get about 1 gram of other stuff, THC, sugars or sweeteners, emulsifiers, flavorings, other chemicals, stabilizers, preservatives, all that other stuff. You've got to get about 1 gram's worth of that stuff into that same serving size in order to stay below that 0.3%. But that also means if you've got a highly flavored beverage, right, with a lot of sugar or a lot of sweeteners and a lot of flavoring, well, that's more weight. Maybe I can bump that up to 5, 10 milligrams, 15 milligrams. I've seen once a 20 milligram tall boy. So you've got to kind of be thinking about not just your 0.3%, but also your final dose per unit of serving. Okay. And this goes to one of the issues I haven't talked about or don't talk about later in this. But fundamentally, the THC is a different product. We're not as familiar with it. We're not as comfortable with it as we are with alcohol regulation. So, for example, we've got real good empirical evidence that says, if you're having a, 1 drink an hour of a beer or, 12 ounces of beer, or was it 4 ounces of wine or 1 ounce of whiskey per hour, your BAC is going to be around 0.08 or less, right? Your BAC, blood alcohol content, leading towards what could be chemically or measurably intoxicated. We don't have that guideline for THC, and we've got anecdotal evidence that it'll hit people very differently, right? So 3 milligrams for one person, they don't feel anything. 3 milligrams for somebody else, and they're seeing smells, right? Or they are hearing colors, right? So you have to be very careful on not only on your formulation, but then what about when you're serving this? What if when you're selling this to consumers? You still have the obligation, potentially liability. Hey, if this person is physically intoxicated, you probably shouldn't sell them anymore, whether it's alcohol or THC, right? So you have to be paying attention to that, and you have to be thinking about, okay, what does this look like? How is it going to work? The signs of intoxication are similar, but not the same. And one of the things we see is body chemistry changes, as well as the THC extract, how it's prepared, how bioavailable it is. I've seen people say, oh, this product, I can feel a buzz or a difference in 15 minutes. This product, it takes 45 minutes or an hour to kick in. Well, problem with that is, what if I've already had 3 additional beverages in that 45 minutes? Now that first one's finally kicking in, and I just figured out I have to sit here for the next 4 hours just so I can find my feet again to drive, right? Because of this longer lag time. It's not the same the same physiological responses we're comfortable with beer. So you have to be watching for that, not necessarily as a formulation issue, but as a cellar issue. Okay. All right. Issue 4, the THC extract. Your brewery is a federally regulated and bonded premises. You cannot have federally illegal drugs on the premises. Sorry, no cocaine, no crack, no heroin. But here's the thing. Any THC product over 0.3% THC by dry weight is cannabis, and that's federally illegal. So here's the part you got to think really hard about. If your final product is 0.3% THC by dry weight, how are you going to add THC to that? So let me give you an example. I talked to a THC supplier and said, how do you tell folks to do this? And they said, well, we come out and we bring a 5-gallon bucket of THC extract and we add that to a tank with water in it to dilute it down to 0.3%. I said, okay, the problem is I can't, the brewery cannot buy that extract from you because it's over 0.3%. That extract is higher than 0.3%. It is an illegal product for anyone except a licensed hemp processor. Like, okay, so in that case, we're not going to sell them that. We're going to sell them the final diluted product. Okay, that's fine too. How do you get it into the tank? Here's where I'm going with that. If it's over 0.3%, it is a federally illegal product. As far as the TTB is concerned, that's like toting in a kilo of Coke, right? It is a product, it is a federal drug that is illegal and should not be in the bonded premises, even if it's in the possession of somebody else. It'd be no different than walking around, because I know people have gotten stung by this before. You are only allowed to have on premises the types of alcohol you are allowed to possess. So, if somebody's walking around with a fifth of whiskey in the bonded premises of the brewery, that's no bueno, right? You're not supposed to have that product in that bonded facility. I know people have gotten violations for things like that. So it's no different there. And the thing that I would worry about, and I'll back up and say, I am legally and ethically precluded from telling you to break the law, right? But I have also heard people say, well, what are the chances they're going to catch me, right? I'm going to buy this 5-gallon bucket of THC extract. As soon as it comes in, I'm going to dump it out and rinse the bucket. It's all gone. What evidence is there that it was ever, above 0.3% THC when it was in the building? Well, so a couple of things. One, I think that's a risky, that's a risk to take, right? It is potentially a high risk because if you were to get caught, depending on the severity, consequences could be up to, having your permit revoked, right? Because again, let's say an ALE, alcohol law enforcement, or police or DEA or the TTB inspector comes in and there are 3 5-gallon buckets full of THC extract that says 30% THC on the bucket. They could ding you hard for that because that's an illegal product and it's not. It's it's yours. You bought it. It's in your possession. It is not in the possession of the licensed hemp processor. That could be potentially very bad for you. So I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying you need to think really carefully about how you're going to do that. And do I think that they're going to start doing random raids on breweries to catch somebody with a THC concentrate? No, but I guarantee you that there are some regulations that will be coming. And any regulation that happens will have an enforcement. It will have some teeth with it and some way to enforce those rules and regulations. And you probably don't want to be on the wrong side of that when it happens. Okay. All right. Issue 5, THC quality. Not all extracts are created equally. I mentioned that earlier where I said, I've talked to one person who said, this product, I get this kind of buzz, this product, I get this kind of buzz, and they both say 5 milligrams on the can. What the hell? right? So it's about that extract and it's about that formulation. Will that product stay in suspension and emulsify, right? THC is essentially an oil. And we all know from brewing, oil does not like water, right? So you have to treat it to get it to stay suspended. I've heard horror stories about not good emulsification or not staying in suspension, such that, you know, somebody said, oh, well, as you drain the tank while you're filling your products, your kegs or cans, the stuff at the top has a lower concentration than the stuff at the bottom. Well, that's not good, because if it's over 0.3% at the bottom, congratulations, it's illegal. Or if it's 0.3%, now the stuff at the top doesn't do anything, right? It's down, it's significant, you know, potentially significantly less than that. So are you misbranding that one? So you've got to be very careful about the extract you're using and the quality that comes with it and how you're using it. And in particular, going back to that DEA bit, can you prove that it was derived from the plant? Sorry, that should be plant, not plan. Can you prove it was derived from the plant and not synthetic? Good THC supplier should be able to show chain of custody all the way back to the farm, right? Let's see. Oh, I've got a slide about that. I'll come back to that here in a second. Issue 6, in general, it's not a beer. So beer franchise law generally doesn't apply, but I've seen this a lot in the last probably 6 months and even a year, you know, the year or 2 years before that. Many distribution agreements give the distributor rights to anything made by the brewery, right? Not just the brand, but anything made by them. So you want to check, if you're in a distribution agreement, go look at that agreement and make sure you know whether this THC beverage is subject to that distribution agreement or not. It may not be a beer franchise law issue, but it will be a contractual issue. Issue 7, there's no margin or tolerance for that 0.3%. That's it. All the product must be less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC by dry weight. To give you some idea, when the farmers are growing this stuff, right, the plant cannot be more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC by dry weight. And the USDA and the inspectors will come out and do a statistical sampling of the field. And if the average is more than 0.3%, they have to torch the entire field. All the crop goes. So it's not like, oh, well, this one's 0.25, that one's 0.35, so it's fine. If they test a product and it's above 0.3, it's an illegal product. So you've got to be very, very careful about that and make sure you're right, you know, that you're correct on that. Now, what happens if you get 2 different test results? You better have a plan for that, right? If you send it off to be tested and it comes back with a difference, it comes back different than your calculations, you need to plan for that, because you need to make sure it's under 0.3%, right? All right. Best practices. All right. So those are most of the issues. I've got a few more slides and then I'll open up for questions. Best practices. Always look for a reputable supplier. Please shop around. Not all suppliers are created equally. Right now, there's a lot of people getting into the business that may have less than stellar motives, right? You don't want to be in a situation where you're purchasing your THC extract from the back of a van in a Walmart parking lot, right? You want to know that they know the product, they know where they got it from, how it's processed, all the way back down the line. Not just somebody who has some THC that is of some quality or concentration. Best practices, again, a water-based beverage rather than a non-alcohol product, right? We talked about that arrested fermentation or dealcoholization. Generally, straight water-based is going to be better because it gets you away from that 0.5% threshold that you want to avoid being wrong about, right? Also, creating a separate brand name, right? This is, again, a best practice. You have to find what works for your business, your brewery, but a separate brand name may give you flexibility either on distribution or to the extent that you may not want to be making this product in 2 to 3 or 4 years, or that it will let you grow the brand in a different way rather than just your brewery out there. You need to have well thought out packaging. what's going to be on the package, how is it going to be written, what do you need to say about it. I encourage folks to put I won't say a warning or a disclaimer, but some additional information on the can about, if you don't know how THC affects you, make sure and try this at home first or in a safe environment. Start gingerly or something along those lines, because we're seeing people pick this up and treat it like they're downing a Miller Lite. And that's a problem potentially when you've got a 15 milligram THC beverage on it. Clear quality specifications, know what it is that you are supposed to be producing and stick to it. Very good documentation. Again, can you prove where this stuff came from, when it went into the can, how shelf stable it is, what's in each can, are the cans consistent between batches and runs. I tend to encourage to start with draft first. One, because again, from a homogeneity perspective, it's easier to remain homogeneous in a keg. It also reduces the amount you need to potentially spend on packaging to see if this product is actually going to work or sell, right? Or whether people are going to like it. So that's a lower risk way to get in or to start getting in. Another one is to age gate, right? Right now, it is the wild, wild west with this stuff. I strongly suggest that you still only serve this to over 21, right? Yes, it's probably illegal yes, I don't even phrase that. Yes, it's legal to sell it to a middle school child. Would I recommend it? No, because I think that puts you at undue risk and is certainly probably not the reputation you want to generate in your community. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk here. In general, where there's uncertainty, where there's risk, there's opportunity. But that doesn't mean that everything's going to be fine, right? There is no clear regulation, certainly at the federal level, and most states have no clear regulation on this. Some states have looked at putting something into place specifically for THC beverages. Some states have looked at this from an overall THC cannabis regulatory scheme, again, like California. Places like Virginia are trying to focus on marketing and packaging, right? What can be on the product? What can it look like? But there's very little out there that's a safe harbor, or I can say, yes, if you do this, you're going to be fine for the next 2 to 5 years. But those regulations are coming. Every state is at least looking at it because every state is seeing the spike in THC beverages. So those regulations are coming. And my gut is that we're going to see a lot of people get into the THC beverage business. And in a year to 2 years, we're going to see that glut come down a lot. People are going to leave as states start putting in more and more regulations on how this product is going to be sold, distributed, or even produced. There are all these other Delta X variations out there. We talked about there's no age gate. What about shipping and handling? Is this shelf stable? Can it take the heat or does it curdle like an IPA does after a little bit? And then one that's really big is what about advertising, right? How do you advertise this stuff? Which leads me to my next one, which is the bad ideas or bad situations. The first example I got from Mark Cerini, General Counsel for the Brewers Association. I think he said it was a brewery out of New York somewhere that was advertising their THC product in a back to school sale. That's probably not entirely wise, right? Yes, that could mean college, but there's a good chance that could just be considered directly advertising to underage consumers, right? That's probably not the focus we want to have for the industry, because again, if we don't police ourselves, the regulators will, and we probably won't like the answer. I had another one. What about that NA beer that comes in over 0.5%? You better be prepared to dilute that. What if you've already maxed out your capacity on your equipment and you're at 0.5%? Ooh, now it gets challenging, right? I talked about the concentration variations, and for gosh sakes, don't make any health claims. Please don't say this will help you sleep. This is for energy. This will do this. If you make health claims, congratulations. Now you've entered a new world of FDA pain as to whether or not this is a drug, right? And whether or not you are making, again, health claims or specifics about that. So there's some bad ideas to finish this off. If you have any questions, please out there in the chat. I'll jump over there in just a second. But here's how to get in touch with me. beerlawcenter.com on all the socials. We're at Beer Law Center. Give us a call or shoot me an email, whatever's easiest. Yeah, always happy to chat. And let me end this slideshow and figure out there we are. Do we have anything in the chat? Let's see, Tina, thanks for tuning in. No, I don't see anything in the chat. That's a shame. I hope some people were listening. I mean, I'll talk to anybody for however long you let me, but I hope somebody was listening and we had some interesting stuff in there that folks learned things. If you have any questions, obviously get up with me. I'm trying to think of other interesting things that I can share about the THC scene and what to expect there. One of the things I suspect is going to come up in regulations in the next year to 2 years, and we've already seen it in places like Virginia, is not only do you have to register all these products with a government entity or authority, but the packaging can only be a certain way. So for example, there's a bill in Virginia that it can't have any cartoon characters, it can't have bright contrasting colors, it can't have certain kinds of catchy names. Like, okay, well, that's going to seriously limit our advertising ability, and probably even more so than we just selling beer, right? So there's that coming down the road. Everywhere I have seen or heard of folks either on the THC regulation or cannabis regulation, in general, they are following the ABC model, right? Where there's going to be a government authority that's in charge of licensing, inspections, collecting tax, regulating the 3-tier model, if you will. And a lot of ways that's probably still going to be something we're going to see moving forward. And I think one of the other reasons both states and the federal government's going to do something with this, of course, is the excise tax, right? Why aren't we charging tax on this THC beverage the way we do for beer and wine and liquor and so forth? So I would expect, like I said, right now, if you're not making a THC beverage and you're a brewery, and a brewery with a tasting room, you're probably leaving money on the table, right? Because somebody's going to buy that THC beverage. It might as well be yours, even if it's on draft in a keg that you're making on a small scale. If you make something that tastes good and doesn't look disgusting, for example, you might as well capture that. On the other hand, I think we are going to see it become much more difficult over the next 1, 2, up to 3 or 4 years to say that same thing. I think there's going to be more regulations, there's going to be more headache. And so I think we will see people diving out of that market as producers in the next few years. So I think right now there's a lot of opportunity. If you are in a space where you can do it right, do it well, and make a high quality product, even if you decide later to, and this again, from a brand perspective, give it a different brand name, spin it off to somebody else, sell it off to another brand in a couple of years when you don't want to do that anymore potentially, or when it's too difficult to do. That's an option for an exit plan out of this. What else that might be somewhat interesting that I can talk about? I've got another 7 minutes. I don't want to dance or anything. Let's see, I'm getting 3 to 4 calls a week about this stuff. And one of the things that I've got 2 or 3 clients now that have been approached by health food distributors actually to take their THC product and ship it up and down the East Coast or nationwide. And well, let's talk about that. What does that look like? What are the expectations there? How is it going to be done? And what we're seeing, or what I've seen a lot of, is these folks as distributors who are looking at taking this health food product and distributing it wider. They're used to taking something that is inherently shelf stable, right? Pills, powders, maybe a protein shake or something like that, and putting that somewhere. I don't know that we have good generally accepted wisdom on shelf stability and flavor profile and efficacy over time for THC the way we do for some alcohol, right? Again, I see an IPA that has a best buy date for more than 7 months ago. I'm not buying that because I know that's going to be garbage. But I don't know if we can say that for THC beverages, or if we can, does it depend on the THC extract, how it was processed? Or does it depend on the beverage? Or does it depend on the handling, right? Those sort of things are going to be one of the next sets. So if you look at, hey, I want to distribute this to the next state, or I want to sign up with these folks to send my product further afield, make sure you understand your product, because some of those I'm hearing, those health place distributors that are willing to take the product and distribute it far and wide, they're looking for a minimum shelf life of 6 months. Okay, have you tested your product for 6 months? Have you tested it for 6 months in an unair conditioned warehouse, for example? So that would be sort of the next question: what does this mean? What is this going to look like? And though beer franchise law doesn't necessarily apply, there's still issues to consider there. So I've run up now to 2:56. I don't see any. Oh, there is a comment. Hold on. Any advice for tap rooms using credit card brokers downtown, there's a fire engine going by. Any advice for tap rooms using credit card brokers through a POS system that refuse to allow online THC transactions like Stripe? Good question. So unfortunately, most of your credit card processors have a morals clause. This happens with THC products. It happens with adult novelties, we'll say, that sometimes producers, wholesalers, and so forth will have their credit card processing charges or abilities revoked. All those are private companies, so they can decide to do that or not do that. And unfortunately, a lot of your POSs are tied specifically to your credit card processor. If there is a separate middle person in between your point of sale and your credit card processor, I'd look at changing your credit card processor. Alternately, I would start looking at talking with your credit card processor if this is a hard and fast rule, if it's a volume issue, right? They don't want a THC tap room, for instance, but they're willing to say, okay, if it's below X amount of your gross sales, we'll consider it an ancillary use, right? Those sort of things. So I think there is an opportunity to talk with your provider, but in a lot of cases, these are fairly large companies and don't have a vested interest in working with you as a small business. So I would suggest probably looking at your alternatives and probably doing some research on that before you pull the trigger. But I think like Square and it'd be a good question for the Arrived folks, whether they're inherently THC as well, but I bet they are, honestly, because they probably can't service this industry well without it right now. So that's the best I can tell you on the POS systems. With that, I'll let everybody go. Thanks again for joining. Thank you, Carlos, for the question. It was a good one. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. John at beerlawcenter.com, or like I said, all the socials, Threads, X, Facebook, at Beer Law Center. Reach out. Happy to chat anytime we can. Anytime we can do anything to help, we're happy to.